They said the most powerful man in the world feared no living enemy, but every night, he listened for the sound of his dead wife breathing behind him. If you're watching this story unfold right now, tell us where you're watching from, comment your country below, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that haunt history long after the candles burn out. The Roman Empire stood at its height, marble white and iron hard, stretching farther than any single man could ride in a lifetime. Its legions marched on command, its governors bowed at a whisper, its emperor ruled from a throne that made kings elsewhere seem like children playing at power. Yet within the palace walls, beyond the reach of soldiers and laws, that emperor slept poorly when he slept at all. He had once been a man of discipline. His days were ordered by bells and messengers, his nights by strategy and study. He believed the world could be understood, measured, controlled. Fate, to him, was merely another opponent to outthink. That certainty had made him feared. It had also made him successful. Then his wife died. No public announcement captured the truth of it. The Senate spoke of illness. The priests spoke of the God's will. The crowds mourned a noble empress taken too soon. But none of them saw what happened afterward, when the doors of the imperial chambers closed and the emperor was left alone with silence that felt occupied. At first it was small, a sensation rather than a sight. He would pause mid-sentence, convinced someone stood just beyond his field of vision. He would wake before dawn with the certainty that he was no longer alone, his heart racing, his mouth dry, his name almost forming on his lips hers. He told himself it was grief. Roman men were not supposed to unravel, but grief was a respectable excuse, even for an emperor. He buried himself in duty. He extended councils late into the night. He issued decrees, reviewed troop movements, punished corruption with renewed severity. To the world, he appeared resolute, hardened by loss. Inside, something else was happening. The palace servants noticed changes first. Corridors once forbidden at night were suddenly lit by torchlight until morning. Guards were posted outside empty rooms. The emperor dismissed companions who spoke too loudly, who laughed, who reminded him that life still moved forward. He began asking questions no one expected about burial rites, about old omens, about whether the dead could carry unfinished business. No one answered honestly. You do not correct a man who commands the world. The emperor kept her memory close, closer than custom allowed. Her likeness remained in private shrines long after official mourning ended. Her jewelry was untouched, her garments preserved as if she might return to claim them. He spoke of her in the present tense, then caught himself, his jaw tightening with visible effort. And still, the feeling followed him. At times, he swore he heard her footsteps where no one walked. At other times, her presence came as a pressure in the air, like a held breath. Once, during a council session, he turned sharply, certain he had heard her voice speak his name with quiet disappointment. The room fell silent. Senators exchanged uneasy glances. The emperor said nothing, but his face drained of color. From that day forward, fear entered Rome in a new form. It was not the fear of invasion or rebellion. It was subtler, decisions slowed. Orders were revised, then revised again. The emperor began ruling as if someone unseen were watching, judging each choice. He delayed wars that once would have been swift. He punished advisors whose counsel seemed to contradict thoughts he had never spoken aloud. Rome had survived madmen before. It had survived tyrants and fools, but this was different. This was an emperor who doubted himself, not because of politics or enemies, but because he believed the dead had opinions. Late one night, alone in his chambers, he finally gave in to the question he had avoided since the funeral. He stood before the darkened doorway of a room. No one entered anymore, the room where she had taken her final breath. His hand hovered over the threshold, trembling. "If you are here," he whispered into the darkness, voice cracking despite years of command, "why do you not speak?" The silence that followed was not empty. It felt like an answer waiting to be understood. Before she became an empress, she was already dangerous to him, not because she challenged his authority, but because she softened it. They had not married for love, at least not at first. Rome rarely allowed its rulers such luxuries. Their union was calculated, approved by advisors who weighed bloodlines and alliances more carefully than hearts. She was intelligent, well-born, and politically convenient. He was already emperor, already accustomed to being obeyed. Neither expected tenderness. Yet it came anyway, quietly, like ivy climbing stone. She learned him in ways no general or senator ever had. She noticed how his certainty wavered in private, how the weight of command pressed heavier at night. She listened when he spoke without performance, without armor. Where others praised his strength, she questioned his doubts and in doing so, made him feel seen rather than judged. In public, she played her role perfectly. Graceful, composed, respectful of tradition. The people adored her because she never seemed distant, even draped in silk and jewels. She spoke to petitioners as if their words mattered. She remembered names. She smiled without calculation. In private, she was something else entirely. She challenged him. She argued. She laughed when he grew too rigid, mocked his tendency to treat life like a battlefield. She reminded him that Rome was not only built on discipline, but on pleasure, art, and memory. Over time, he found himself seeking her counsel before making decisions, then telling himself it was coincidence. It was not. Her influence seeped into the empire subtly. Policies softened at the edges, executions became rarer, negotiation replaced immediate force. The emperor did not grow weaker, but Rome grew, different, calmer, more humane. Some senators whispered that the empress ruled him. Others feared it. None dared say it aloud. He loved her not because she agreed with him, but because she did not. That love became dependence faster than he realized. When he faced rebellion on the frontier, it was her letters he reread at night. When illness swept the city, it was her presence beside him that steadied his resolve. She became his private compass, the quiet voice that grounded him when the roar of empire threatened to deafen everything else. Then she fell ill. At first it was dismissed as exhaustion. Court life drained even the strongest. Physicians prescribed rest, tonics, prayers. She joked about it even as her strength faded. He watched too closely, memorizing details he did not yet know would haunt him, the way her hand trembled when she lifted a cup, the pauses in her speech she tried to hide. As days passed, fear crept in where certainty once lived. He summoned the best healers in the empire. When they failed, he summoned priests. When prayers brought no change, he turned inward, bargaining with gods he had never truly believed in. He promised temples, sacrifices, reforms, anything. Nothing answered. She knew before he did. One night, when the palace lay quiet, she asked him to sit beside her. Her voice was weaker now, but her gaze remained sharp. "You are afraid," she said softly. "I am not," he replied, too quickly. She smiled, the familiar knowing smile. "You are afraid of what you will become without me." The word struck harder than any enemy's blade. He wanted to deny it, wanted to tell her Rome would endure, that he would endure. But she had never accepted lies from him, especially comforting ones, so he said nothing. His silence told her everything. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything, when I am gone," she continued. "Do not turn me into a ghost you cannot escape. Remember me as I was, not as something that chains you." He held her hand tighter, as if grip alone could prevent fate from completing its work. "You will not be gone," she did not argue. That, more than anything, frightened him. Her death came before dawn, quietly, without spectacle. No final speech, no last decree. Just a slow fading, like a lamp running out of oil. He was there when it happened. He felt the exact moment her hand went slack in his. Something in him went slack with it. The empire mourned, but the emperor did not weep in public. He stood unmoving at the funeral pyre, face carved from stone. The flames reflected in his eyes as if burning something behind them as well. What no one knew was that he never truly left her side. In the days after her death, he returned again and again to the memories they had shared, replaying conversations, arguments, laughter. At night, he spoke to her as if she could still hear him. At first, it was habit. Then it became necessity. And then something changed. One evening, exhausted and half asleep, he spoke her name aloud, accusing himself of weakness. In response, the air in the room seemed to shift. He felt the unmistakable sensation of being observed, not by guards, not by servants, but by someone who knew him too well. He did not see her, but he felt her disapproval, sharp and familiar. The emperor sat upright, heart pounding, mind racing. Grief could explain hallucinations, guilt could explain fear, but this felt too precise, too personal. It felt like her, for the first time since her death. A terrifying thought took hold. The emperor told himself what if she had not left him at all, when wounded deeply enough, learned cruel tricks. That explanation was comforting. Roman philosophy allowed for it. Grief could fracture reason, loss could conjure illusions. He clung to those ideas in the days that followed, repeating them like prayers whenever the sensation returned, that unmistakable awareness of her presence, hovering just beyond sight. Yet the palace itself seemed unwilling to play along with his logic. It began with doors. Servants swore they left certain chambers sealed, only to find them open by morning. Curtains were drawn back that no one admitted touching. A brazier once burned low overnight, though no guard had been posted nearby. Each incident was small, easily dismissed on its own. Together, they formed a pattern that unsettled even the most seasoned household staff. The emperor noticed everything. He had always possessed a keen eye, but now it sharpened into something almost obsessive. He began walking the palace late at night, barefoot, listening. He memorized the sounds of the building, the groan of settling stone, the whisper of wind through colonnades, so that any deviations stood out immediately. There were deviations. Once, he heard the faint rustle of fabric behind him, unmistakably the sound of silk brushing marble. He turned so quickly his breath caught in his throat. The corridor lay empty, torches steady, shadows unmoving. Still, his pulse refused to slow. Another night, he woke to the sensation of weight at the edge of the bed, as if someone had sat beside him. He did not move. He could not. The air felt heavy, charged, and painfully familiar. His mouth formed her name before his mind could stop it. Nothing answered. By day, he resumed his duties with rigid precision. He spoke less, he listened more. When advisors addressed him, he studied their faces as though searching for signs that they, too, sensed what followed him like a second shadow. None did. Their ignorance isolated him more effectively than any prison. Rumors, however, moved faster than truth. Whispers spread among the palace servants, quiet warnings exchanged near kitchens and baths. Some spoke of the empress refusing to leave. Others claimed the emperor wandered the halls speaking to no one. A few believed the gods had cursed the palace for reasons no one dared voice aloud. The emperor heard none of these rumors directly. He felt them instead in the subtle shift of behavior. Eyes dropped when he passed. Conversations stopped abruptly. Even his most loyal guards grew uneasy during the night watches. It was during one such night that the illusion of control finally shattered. He stood alone in the former empress's chamber, the room preserved exactly as she had left it. The air still carried a trace of her scent, or perhaps his memory supplied it. He did not know anymore. He traced the edge of her dressing table, fingers lingering on objects that no longer served a purpose. "You asked me not to turn you into a ghost," he said softly, voice rough with fatigue, "but you never told me how to let you go." The torches flickered, not violently, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. The emperor froze. The flame steadied again, but the room felt altered, compressed, as if its walls had drawn closer. He sensed it immediately. He was no longer alone. "Speak," he demanded, anger rising to mask fear. "If this is grief, then leave me. If this is something else, then have the courage to show yourself." Silence answered him, then, unmistakably, the sound of breath. Slow, controlled, familiar. He turned. She stood near the far wall, not as a corpse, not as a wraith torn by decay, but as he remembered her in life, whole, watchful, real enough that his mind struggled to reject what his eyes insisted upon. He did not rush toward her. He did not scream. Years of command held him in place, though his hands trembled. "You should not be here," he said, the words barely steady. Her expression was not cruel, nor tender. It was something in between, disappointment edged with restraint. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence carried weight, heavier than accusation. He stepped back, heart pounding, and in that moment the vision dissolved. The wall stood empty once more. The torches burned evenly. The room returned to stillness, but the damage was done. From that night on, he could no longer pretend uncertainty. The encounters grew more frequent, more invasive. She appeared in reflections that vanished when he turned. He heard her voice murmuring his name during council sessions, forcing him to pause mid-decree. Sometimes, when he made decisions she would have opposed in life, the sense of her presence sharpened, disapproving, relentless. The emperor began altering his behavior in response. He abandoned plans she would have despised. He spared men she once argued deserved mercy. At times he reversed decisions without explanation, leaving advisors baffled. Rome continued to function, but its ruler now governed with one eye on the visible world and one on something only he could see. He sought help, quietly. Philosophers offered reason. Physicians offered tonics. Priests offered rituals meant to appease restless spirits. None changed anything. The presence remained, indifferent to incense and logic alike. Worse still, it began to feel intentional. She appeared not randomly, but at moments of consequence. Before major decisions, after acts of cruelty. When he tried to forget her, she lingered closer. When he surrendered to her memory, she withdrew just enough to keep him reaching. The emperor, master of legions, realized with growing horror that he was no longer ruling alone. And if she truly was there, if this was not madness, then her silence carried meaning. She was not haunting him out of love. She was waiting. The emperor still rose before dawn, still presided over councils, still signed decrees with the same steady hand. To an untrained eye, nothing had changed. Those closest to him sensed the fracture beneath the surface, the pauses that lingered too long. The gaze that drifted toward empty space, the way his decisions now seemed guided by conversations no one else could hear. Rome felt it before it understood it. Military campaigns stalled without explanation. Governors waited weeks for responses that once came within days. Orders were issued, then quietly reversed. The empire did not collapse, but it slowed, as if caught between breaths. The emperor was aware of it all. He simply no longer trusted his own judgment. Each decision felt observed, evaluated. He imagined her standing just beyond his vision, weighing his choices the way she had in life. Sometimes her presence was sharp, condemning. Other times, it was distant, cold, as if disappointment had hardened into something more dangerous. He began speaking to her openly, not in public, never that. But in private moments, late nights in his chambers, solitary walks through gardens long abandoned, he argued with the air, defended his reasoning, asked for approval he rarely felt. When the sensation of her presence intensified, he altered course. When it withdrew, he felt exposed, abandoned. His advisors noticed the pattern. Those who pressed for harsher measures found themselves dismissed. Those who urged caution were suddenly favored. Loyalty became less important than alignment with the unseen influence shaping the emperor's will. The Senate grew restless. Whispers of instability reached the provinces. Yet no one dared confront him. The emperor's temper, once controlled, had grown unpredictable. At times he lashed out at perceived betrayal, accusing men of motives they did not hold. At other times he retreated into silence, eyes fixed on nothing, face unreadable. The people of Rome sensed something was wrong, temples filled. Omens were sought in flights of birds and patterns of smoke. Stories spread, some claiming the empress walked the palace at night, others insisting the emperor had angered the gods. The emperor himself no longer knew which explanation frightened him more. What troubled him most was that the haunting was no longer confined to nights or solitude. It followed him into moments of rule, into matters that shaped thousands of lives. When a rebellion flared in a distant province, he hesitated not because the threat was unclear, but because he felt her disapproval pressing against his thoughts. She had always despised unnecessary bloodshed. So he delayed. The rebellion grew. When reports arrived of villages burned and citizens slaughtered, guilt twisted through him, but so did something else. Her presence receded, as if satisfied by his restraint. The realization chilled him more than any accusation could have. Was she guiding him toward mercy or punishing him through consequence? He sought answers in memory, revisiting every argument they had ever shared. He wondered whether he had misunderstood her in life, whether he had shaped her now into something that served his need for absolution. Yet the presence felt too autonomous, too resistant to his desires, to be merely imagined. One night, unable to bear the uncertainty, he summoned a respected philosopher under cover of darkness. The man listened carefully as the emperor spoke, carefully omitting visions, but describing doubt, hesitation, the sense of being judged by something internal and unyielding. The philosopher's answer was cautious, measured. A man who places his conscience outside himself, he said slowly, will always be ruled by it. The words struck deeper than intended. That conscience, however, wore her face. Soon after, something changed in the haunting itself. Her appearances grew clearer, more deliberate. She no longer vanished immediately when noticed. Sometimes, she lingered just long enough for him to meet her gaze. There was no warmth in it now, no intimacy, only expectation. He tried to defy her. He ordered an execution she would have opposed. The moment the decree was sealed, the pressure in the room became unbearable. His breath shortened, his hands shook. That night, he dreamed of her standing over him, silent, unblinking, until he woke drenched in sweat and tore the order apart. The execution never happened. Word spread quickly. The emperor was being ruled by fear, by superstition, by something unseen. Rivals sensed opportunity, governors tested limits. The empire bent, not from invasion, but from uncertainty at its center. The emperor felt it slipping through his fingers. He had once believed power meant command over others. Now he understood the crueler truth. Power required command over oneself, and he was losing that battle. The haunting no longer felt like grief. It felt like a reckoning. Late one evening, after dismissing his council without explanation, the emperor returned to the chamber where she had died. He stood in the same place, under the same shadows, but his voice held a new edge. "You are not here to comfort me," he said. "You are here to judge me." She appeared slowly, as if summoned by the admission. For the first time, she spoke. Not aloud, but within him, a presence so clear it stole his breath. "You were never meant to rule alone." The words carried no accusation, no mercy, only certainty. In that moment, the emperor understood the truth he had avoided since her death. This haunting was not about love lingering beyond the grave. It was about something unfinished between them, something buried alongside her, now clawing its way back into the world. And whatever it was no longer content to whisper. The words echoed inside him long after her presence faded. "You were never meant to rule alone." The emperor did not sleep that night. He sat awake until dawn, replaying every moment of their marriage, every argument he had dismissed, every warning he had chosen not to hear. What terrified him was not the haunting itself anymore. It was the growing certainty that she was right. He had never ruled alone because he had never truly listened. When she lived, her influence softened his power, balanced it, restrained the worst of his instincts. But he had always believed the final authority was his. Her counsel was welcome, her opposition tolerated, but ultimately ignored when it mattered most. Now she had returned not as a partner, but as consequence. That realization hardened something inside him. If this haunting had purpose, then it could be confronted. If it carried truth, then it could be faced without fear. The emperor had spent his life standing against enemies greater than himself. He would not shrink now from the ghost of the woman he loved. He ordered the palace sealed for the night, no guards in the inner corridors, no servants lingering in shadow. He wanted silence undisturbed, undeniable. He returned to the chamber where she first appeared, carrying no torches. Moonlight alone cut pale lines across the marble floor. The room felt heavier than before, thick with expectation. "I know why you are here," he said, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "And I know what you want from me." She emerged without drama, her form clear, solid, unmistakable. She looked at him as she once had in life, searching, unflinching. But now there was distance between them, a boundary neither could cross. "You do not want repentance," he continued. "You do not want grief. You want acknowledgement." Her gaze did not waver. "You warned me," he said. "You warned me about what power would make of me if left unchecked, and I listened only when it pleased me." Memory rose like a blade. He remembered dismissing her concerns about executions meant to inspire fear, remembered choosing conquest over diplomacy when she begged restraint, remembered the night she asked him what Rome would become when ruled by a man who never doubted himself. He had laughed then. Now there was no laughter. "I shaped you into a conscience because I refused to carry one fully myself," he said. "I turned you into a ghost because I could not accept that you were right while alive." The pressure in the room intensified, not hostile, but demanding. The air vibrated with restrained emotion. For the first time, he sensed not accusation but pain. She stepped closer. This time, she spoke aloud. "You loved me," she said, "but you never trusted me with your power." The truth landed cleanly, devastating in its simplicity. "I was afraid," he admitted, "afraid that if I shared it, I would lose myself." "And now?" she asked. He met her gaze. "Now I have." Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full. In it, he understood the true nature of the haunting. She was not there to guide him forever. She was there because something remained unresolved, something he had to face alone. "You are not meant to rule with me," he said slowly. "You are here because I never learned to rule without you." Her expression softened, not with forgiveness, but with release. "You must decide who you are," she said. "Not as my husband, not as Rome's emperor, but as a man who accepts the cost of his choices." The realization burned. As long as he allowed her presence to steer him, he would never reclaim himself. Rome would continue to falter under a ruler divided against his own reflection. The haunting was not punishment. It was a test he had prolonged by clinging to her. "I do not ask you to stay," he said, voice thick. "And I will not ask you to forgive me." She studied him, as if weighing the sincerity of every word. "What will you do?" she asked. "I will rule," he said, "with memory, not fear, with responsibility, not ghosts." For a moment, the room trembled, not violently, but like something loosening its grip. The air felt lighter, though sorrow pressed deeper. He realized then what letting go truly meant. It was not forgetting. It was accepting that love did not excuse failure. She reached out, not to touch him, but to place her hand over her own heart. "You were never haunted by me," she said softly. "You were haunted by the man you refused to become." Her form began to fade, not abruptly but gently, as if retreating into something larger than either of them. He felt the loss immediately. Not panic, not fear, just the hollow ache of finality. "Goodbye," he whispered. She did not answer. When dawn came, the palace felt different. Still, ordinary. The emperor walked its halls without sensing her presence for the first time since her death. The silence no longer pressed against him, but peace did not come with relief. It came with weight. He resumed his duties with renewed clarity and ruthless honesty. Some policies hardened, others softened. He accepted rebellions would cost lives, and that mercy could also be cruel. He no longer searched for approval in empty rooms. Rome began to stabilize. Yet something in the emperor had changed permanently. He ruled now with the quiet knowledge that love had once tempered him and that its absence demanded greater discipline than ever before. History would record his later reign as resolute, effective, and cold. What it would never record was the truth that the most important battle of his life had not been fought against men or gods but against the shadow of the woman who knew him best, and that, in winning it, he had lost her forever. The emperor learned the sound of silence all over again. It was not the uneasy silence that had followed her death, heavy with expectation and unseen judgment. This was different. This silence did not watch him. It did not wait. It simply existed, indifferent, vast, and final. For the first time in months, he slept through the night. When morning came, Rome did not feel healed. It felt exposed. The emperor stood alone at the center of power, unshielded by memory, unguided by the voice that had once steadied and unsettled him in equal measure. There was no presence to approve or condemn. Every choice was his again, fully and irrevocably. That knowledge weighed more than any haunting ever had. He ruled with precision afterward, not hesitation. He accepted that some decisions would stain his conscience and others would save lives at unseen cost. He no longer delayed action in search of invisible consent. When wars were necessary, he waged them decisively. When mercy served Rome, he offered it without fear of appearing weak. The empire responded. Trade stabilized. Rebellions were crushed or negotiated into submission. Governors obeyed once more. Rome regained its rhythm, its confidence in the man at its center. To the people, the emperor seemed transformed, colder perhaps, but undeniably effective. They called it maturity. They called it strength. They did not see what it cost. The emperor removed her likeness from public shrines, but kept one small statue hidden in his private study, not as an object of devotion, but as reminder. He did not speak to it. He did not ask questions of it. He allowed memory to exist without giving it authority. Some nights, he stood before it in silence, acknowledging what had been and what would never be again. He never remarried. Advisors urged him to secure succession, to form new alliances, to move on as emperors were expected to do. He refused without explanation. Love, he had learned, was not something to replace lightly, especially when its absence had shaped him so profoundly. In time, stories faded. The rumors of hauntings dissolved into myth. Servants who once whispered of ghosts grew old or left the palace. The Senate recorded his reign in careful language, firm, disciplined, occasionally ruthless, undeniably successful. History, as always, favored outcomes over causes. Yet even as the years passed, the emperor remained marked, not broken, not mad, marked. He carried within him the knowledge that power without reflection breeds tyranny, and that reflection borrowed from another soul becomes dependence. He had learned too late how deeply he had relied on her moral weight to balance his own ambition. Her haunting had forced him to confront a truth no crown could protect him from, that love can guide, but it cannot rule in your place. On the anniversary of her death, many years later, the emperor walked alone through the gardens where they once argued and laughed. The stones had worn smooth. The trees had grown taller. Rome endured, just as he had promised it would. He paused beneath the open sky, feeling neither watched nor judged. "I did not forget you," he said quietly, not to a ghost but to memory itself. "I finally learned how to live without hiding behind you." The wind moved through the leaves, offering no reply, and for the first time he did not need one. When the emperor died, Rome mourned him as a great ruler. Statues were raised, speeches were made. His legacy was carved into stone. A man who restored order, who strengthened the empire, who ruled with unwavering resolve. What stone could never capture was the truth behind that resolve. That the greatest transformation of his reign had not come from conquest or law, but from grief faced honestly, without illusion. He had been haunted once, not by a restless spirit, but by the echo of love demanding accountability. And when he finally listened, Rome and the man who ruled it survived.